J.N. Darby is one of the most influential and mysterious figures in church history. The mystery around his life and teaching today probably masks much of our recognition of his influence. It also causes us to believe he was influential for many things that he never taught, or even explicitly rejected. When it comes to other highly influential figures, especially the most well-known, such as Augustine, Luther, and Calvin, there are hundreds of books on their lives and their teachings. You could probably fill an entire personal library with books exclusively written on Martin Luther. Darby, though, is an enigma to most. He wrote so much that the volume of his writings makes it challenging to understand the totality of his views in many issues. And so little was written on his personal life that it can be challenging to set him in his historical context. Well, thankfully, we're finally receiving some biographies on Darby. A few new biographies are being published to help shed a light on this man who was said to have invented the pre-trib rapture and started dispensationalism, if he even did either of those. Crawford Gribben recently released an excellent work focused primarily on Darby's teaching earlier in the year 2024. Now, SCS Press released a new biography on the early years of Darby's life in May of 2024. This book was written by the master sleuth, Max Weremchuk, and it's titled Becoming J.N.D. This book looks into the first 29 years of the life of Darby to examine the world and the people that shaped this controversial servant of God. And if you have a few minutes, I would love to tell you about what you can expect to find in the book, Becoming J.N.D. Welcome to Rev Reads. If you want to discover more books that will help you to dive deeper into church history, please subscribe to the channel in order to stay up to date with my latest book reviews. Also, please share this video with all of your friends on social media so that they can know about the fascinating work of Max Weremchuk. And I also want to say thank you to the Buy Me a Coffee members. Your support goes so far in allowing me to cover the costs of keeping up with Rev Reads in order to put out these book reviews. And if you have been helped by Rev Reads, I would love for you to consider supporting the channel at a beginning membership cost of only $3 a month. The first thing I want to say about Becoming J.N.D. is that this book is kind of like owning your own little personal library or resource store on the early years of Darby's life. The narrative that Weremchuk tells on Darby's first 29 years covers the first 364 pages of this book. Then there are 39 appendices, covering everything from his family tree to a collection of important letters to a timeline of Darby's life, including my favorite appendix, which was a letter from Captain Rock, who was threatening Darby if he continued his evangelism work in Ireland. And the one thing that surprised me about this book was how little we have written on Darby during his early years. And most of it does remain a mystery. But it's great how Weremchuk is able to build this entire narrative based upon the world that Darby inhabited, from the style of education at the various schools he attended, with documentation not on those schools in general, but specifically relating to Darby's own time there, and then about how impoverished the citizens of Ireland were while Darby was traveling around in a destitute manner to share the gospel with them while he was still part of the established church. And he did all this without having very much direct information from Darby or people writing about Darby during that time period. Weremchuk was able to create this engaging and enlightening picture of the world that shaped Darby. So it's got a really apt title in Becoming J.N.D. One sign that a book really piques my interest while I'm reading it is if the book's contents end up taking up a lot of my conversation time with my wife. And I kept coming back to my wife and telling her about all the things I was learning on Westminster School or Trinity College, or learning about how crazy Darby's education was at Westminster, how they would encourage the boys to fight in order to toughen them up, and also what law school was like in those days. It's kind of bonkers. And you can really see two distinct things reading this. First, how that world and those circumstances really did shape what J.N. Darby would eventually teach in multiple areas in his life. And second, why Darby's major source of interest, especially in the early days of his ministry, was not eschatology. It wasn't about premillennialism or the rapture, but it was about ecclesiology and the church. And while there's a lot to comment on regarding the formation of Darby's early views on the church, I'd like to share two things in this review. First, I want to say Weremchuk is a top-notch historian, in the fact that he is clearly not a Darby apologist or a Darby antagonist, but he is seeking the best I think we could be able to today to gain an accurate understanding of the life of J.N. Darby. He's willing to examine Darby's own claims and test them with other sources, and even point out places where he's like, yeah, Darby was clearly inaccurate there, or he was just plain wrong at that place, when Darby was writing later in his life about memories from earlier days. Second, Darby should be given a fresh examination today regarding his views on the church. While I see some of Darby's conclusions regarding the nature of the church to kind of be unworkable today, Darby did grow up in a culture where the Christian nationalism, that is the hot button theological issue in the American church today, that was pretty much the standard view of the church during his time. And Darby came out of it. He took a strong stand against it and the divisions that existed in the church at that time that were really the only way the average Christian thought they could view the church at all. The things that the Protestant church in Ireland was doing against the Roman Catholics in that country were truly awful. And I say that as someone who is in no way a Roman Catholic apologist, but the actions of the Anglican church were terrible and they should be condemned. And I found a lot of Darby's comments about his own church and his own time helpful, and will give me a lot to meditate on for the church in my day. Views such as, the true church of God was those that were united to Christ in heaven. I at once felt that all the parish was not that. When I look around to find this unity, I found it nowhere. If I joined one set of Christians, I did not belong to another. And then later writing, I found the system I was mixed up with to be the world and not the church of God at all. The system is wrong. It substitutes man for God. True ministry is the gift and the power of God's Spirit, not man's appointment. Through a knee injury that Darby had that laid him up for some time and kind of isolated him alone with his Bible, and along with the failures of the Second Reformation to win Ireland for the Protestant cause, Darby was able to see the troubles of the church in his day, and I believe much of his wisdom can speak to the troubles of the church in our day. As you have people in the church today who are seeking to return to that medieval melding of church and state, and Darby speaks powerfully to these times. I recommend Becoming J.N.D. for those who want to discover the world that helped shape J.N. Darby. And also, if you're just really interested in learning about that era in church history, the mid-1800s in England and Ireland, this book is really interesting. Like, it is a great journey, and I'm looking and hoping for a next chapter in the story of Darby from Max Weremchuk.